This is eCoffee with Experts, where marketers and founders share what's actually working in SEO, AI, and digital growth. Grab your coffee and fuel your mind as we chat with top minds about their wins, struggles, and lessons you won't find in a blog post. Brought to you by Digital Web Solutions, we bring real talk to help you grow your business, one episode at a time. Let's get started.
Chelsea Perino, welcome to eCoffee with Experts. Good to have you.
Thanks so much for having me. Happy to be here.
And you're tuning in from London now, but you're headquartered in Hong Kong. How is it living in Hong Kong?
I think Hong Kong is one of the most amazing cities. I heard somebody describe it the other day as a super connector, and I think that is such a beautiful way to describe the city because it really does sit in this really unique position, both geographically, but just also from a positioning perspective. You've got such a diverse group of people that live there. You've got such a diverse geography, which I didn't even know when I moved there. You know, you've got beautiful beaches, you've got endless amounts of nature. And then you've got this, metropolis, which is what most people associate Hong Kong with, stuck right in the center of all of it. And you've got still such a rich culture. So it really does kind of blend all the best things of one sort of city into this beautiful melting pot. But then just in terms of the connectivity, in terms of business, it's a really, really interesting place to be. You've got finance, you've got real estate, you've got insurance, you've got a very, very rich creative culture. So yeah, it's a really interesting place. I highly recommend it for a visit if you haven't been.
Yeah, I've been there once on an 8-hour layover, and I just walked around the hills and, tried not to get lost, which was, harder than it seems. Yeah, there was quite a bit to, but you know what? I made a lot of friends while I was there, which was really cool. But jumping right into the super connector aspect of things, tech and AI, Hong Kong is a great place to be for that. However, there are some limitations. Before we get into all of that, if I were your grandma and I asked you, Chelsea, what do you do for work? Tell me, what is it that you do all day while you're at work? How would you describe your role to me as your grandma?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that question because up until very recently, I basically had to do that to every person that I met for a couple of reasons. First of all, I work for the flexible workspace industry, and until, even as recent as 2015, but I would argue that up until COVID, people didn't really know what the flexible workspace industry was. If you didn't work in real estate, if you didn't work in a flexible workspace, you just kind of thought, oh yeah, it's, I guess, one of those big open rooms that have desks and people show up in board shorts. And I've heard that there are beer taps and it's kind of like a frat party, but it's work. Sure, that does exist, I'm sure, somewhere, but that's just a small piece of the larger flexible workspace ecosystem. So I think in a nutshell, the flexible workspace ecosystem is a part of the larger real estate industry, becoming a much bigger player in terms of its integration and its importance. It helps people work in a way that is more adaptable. It allows businesses to be more intelligent about their real estate portfolios, especially when it comes to, investing in assets and in spaces that are being used. And for my particular job description, I guess you could say, I run the global marketing department for one of the biggest flexible workspace providers in Asia. And that means I help explain to everybody, all my grandmas and my clients and my friends and everybody else out there, what the flexible workspace market actually is, and particularly for the brand I work for called the Executive Center, why we're different from all the other players that are out there. Comes down to a couple of key things. We're grade A office buildings only. Our clientele are 85% multinational organizations, which is contrary to the general public's perception of what a flexible workspace is. And we focus on service and hospitality. So we consider ourselves part of the 5-star hospitality business ecosystem.
With that, you mentioned the Executive Center, obviously, is the brand that you're representing. And I would imagine that in explaining these to the grannies like myself and your friends who aren't in the flexible workspace industry, brand has to come in very strongly. And especially in your online advertising, you don't want the guy with the board shorts who's just looking for the free keg to come into, the Executive Center. It's a very different clientele, as well as on the real estate side. If you're looking for investors for A-grade properties, you're not gonna, I'm assuming, but I would assume that you're not gonna necessarily want kind of the scrappy crowd-funded real estate startup to invest in these buildings, right? You're looking for a more elevated clientele. Like, what are some of the strategies that you're using to help your teams deploy that sort of a brand message online globally, in Asia Pacific and beyond?
I think that's an important question, and we really try to apply a think global, act local strategy. So it's a mixed strategy where we look at the larger real estate environment and what are the conversations that multinational organizations are having, what are some of the challenges that they're facing, and then we try to think about how can a flexible workspace try and solve those problems, or at least provide some alternative kinds of solutions to those problems. So distributed workforces, the return to office challenges that we've all heard about, the fact that a lot of owned assets in large real estate portfolios are actually underutilized or not utilized at all. And so when we're thinking about what is our messaging, those are the kinds of questions that we're asking and how we're trying to frame the material and the content that we're putting in front of the specific audiences that we're trying to reach. So I mentioned
Mm,
for the executive center, about 85% of our clientele are multinational organizations. So that means when we're building our targeting profiles, we're looking for C-suite executives, we're looking for people that are working in those kinds of organizations as opposed to trying to target, the startup ecosystem or, even like pre-seed or round A sort
mhm,
of startup funds, that sort of stuff. And so that's part of it. The messaging is really important. And depending on what target group we're trying to reach, we change the message. We also think
mm,
about our product portfolio because, again, oftentimes people think of the flexible workspace industry as one product.
mm,
And that's not actually true because for us, we have multiple products that we offer. One is private offices. So we have ads and campaigns around a private office target audience, organizations that are looking for their own office where they can put their brand name on the wall, where they have a key, where it's only their employees that are sitting in that office. That's one sort of segment. Then we
mm,
have what I would say most people associate with flexible working, which is co-working, right? Which is,
mhm,
individual subscription passes where people sit in open lounge areas. Even as companies, that's also an option, but most people associate it with individuals. We have that product as well. It just makes up a very small percentage of our portfolio. Then we have our shared amenities. So we have tons of different sizes of meeting rooms, everything from boardrooms down to four-person meeting rooms that are rented on an hourly basis. And it can actually be rented by anyone. It doesn't have to be people that have offices within the executive center. It can be anyone. So you could
mm.
have rented our podcast studio, for example, in Australia if
Yeah.
you wanted to host a podcast there. We have one of those, by the way.
Oh,
So
nice.
there are different, and then we have our event vertical as well, which is the utilization of all of our beautiful lounges. So we've got full service
Mm,
barista bars in all of our offices with amazing views that clients can rent to host anything from, thought leadership sessions to cocktail events. And then we have actual dedicated event spaces like auditoriums and big theaters where we've held everything from conferences to seminars. We've had fashion shows, we've done press releases, all kinds of stuff. So that also very much dictates what the ad, I say, mix looks like. We're
mhm,
also constantly working on a localized level with all of our business development teams to understand what do they actually need to sell. So as opposed to us from a marketing perspective saying, okay, here are all of our products, we're going to push all of them equally, we're going to invest the same amount of money in all of them. We ask the teams, hey, well, where do you need support? Right? Because
mhm,
it wouldn't be smart from a strategy perspective and also financially from an ROI perspective for us to be spending tons of money on ads for private offices if we have 100% occupancy. We don't need to
mm,
sell those offices, they're already sold. So
mhm,
maybe we then shift our focus into some of the more short term products like co-working passes or event spaces or trying to push more meeting rooms. If we're looking at, different times of year, like for example, we're in holiday season right now. What do people do during holiday season? They host holiday parties. What do they need for holiday parties? They need spaces. So we do big pushes for our event spaces over holiday seasons, right? Because we're like, oh, look, here's an amazing space for a cocktail party, for your Christmas party, for your client appreciation dinner, etc. So it's definitely not a one size fits all. And we're always changing our strategy based off of, times of year and occupancy rates and what products need support. And definitely on a region by region and even on a city by city level. So that's the strategy side. But then the visual content is another piece of the puzzle that is so important,
Hmm.
and the format of the content. So for us, the infrastructure and the design of our spaces is another one of the things that makes us very different from our competitors. And so we invest a lot of effort into visually representing our spaces in really authentic ways so that when somebody sees an ad for one of our products or encounters us on a social media channel, the first reaction is like, wow, what a beautiful space
Hmm.
that is. I can see myself working there. I want to sit with that view. Wow, that coffee that was, that latte art that was designed by the in-house barista. Wow, what an amazing service to have in my office. I want to work in a place like that. And so we created a ton of content. And then obviously we continue to watch what's trending on all of the various channels. And then the last piece when it comes to channel strategy is because I mentioned we're in, 15 different regions, there are very different channels that are used to reach audiences. So you've got the Western channels that we're probably most familiar with. You've got the Googles and Instagram and Facebook and all of those. But then in China, it's a completely different ecosystem, right? You've
Hmm.
got WeChat, you've got Little Red Book. They use Baidu as their search engine. And you got
Hmm.
a Dianping, which is like almost like a Foursquare. Then in Korea, you've got Naver and Kakao, and you've got Line for messaging in Japan. And so we're also localizing in that way because our belief is that you need to go where your audience is. You can't expect them to come to where you are.
Mm. Mhm. Yeah. That opened so many doors, and I remember when I was in Kuala Lumpur, which I stayed for over a year. I was working for a tech company, but I was also doing my own projects. And one of the projects that I did was it was hosting a workshop for community builders because that was what my role was. But I collaborated with a co-working space and had probably 20, 25 people show up, and the pitch to them, like the collaboration to them, was, hey, listen, your push right now is to get more memberships. Like, it wasn't to fulfill, occupancy in terms of like private offices. They really had a push for memberships. And I said, I'm thinking about doing this project or doing this, workshop. And they happily opened the doors for me with, I don't think I paid anything, but my benchmarks for them were I had to bring a minimum of, so many people. Otherwise, they would charge me. I can't remember specifically what it was. It was a couple years ago, but it ended up, turning out really well. Obviously, entrepreneurs and solo founders were coming, and that was the exact target market for them. And it just aligned with their push for that right then. And then I wanted to do that in a place that had a specific like feel, and I'm pretty sure I found them on social media through an ad. So it makes sense. Like, they had their ads targeted toward me, which obviously it makes sense. I'm curious because there's kind of two aspects. There's a couple aspects that I'm thinking of in terms of building community. You see it, or I see it all the time on LinkedIn. A lot of people are saying LinkedIn has become oversaturated with basically just pitching, content. People are just content thought leaders are just pitching their programs on LinkedIn. And so there's much more of a move toward private channels, private WhatsApp, Slack, Signals, et cetera. So there's people who want to collaborate, which would be something that, like the executive center. But then there's like an internal, right, for your internal team, which is global. And then you obviously have your clients. So how do you think about community in terms of like, yeah, how do you maintain community with teams that are hybrid and distributed and like all over the world? How do you bring people together internally?
I mean, if I cracked that question, I'd be a millionaire, right? I mean, it's a question that I think everybody is struggling with, especially as we emerged from COVID and are now in this, new era of work that everybody's trying to understand.
Yeah.
I think the idea of community has been re-emphasized. It's so funny
Mhm.
because before this work from anywhere era
Hmm.
became something that was more mainstream. People sat at their desks from 9 to 5 and daydreamed about being a digital creator that could sit in the Bahamas on a beach and do their work from there. Right. And I can't believe I have to get up and commute to my office and sit here. Gosh, it would be so nice to work from home. And then all of a sudden, everybody did have to work from home, and people were like, get me the F out of here. This is the
Yeah.
worst.
Yeah.
Right. So, what I think is really exciting is there's been this reawakening, right, where people say, okay, wait a minute. Actually, working from home 100% of the time for most people isn't ideal. And working in an office all of the time for most people isn't ideal either. And so for me, I think communication is the biggest key in unlocking what that mix is. Because
Mm.
if the whole idea of feeling like you're a part of an organization, which I think everybody wants to feel that, and that's why organizations are really pushing for people to come back into the office, because that's where you build connections, you get a better understanding of what an organization stands for. And that's why flexible office spaces as part of the office ecosystem are so important, because offices are never going to go away. I really believe that.
Yeah.
And it's just proven, when everybody said, oh, the office is going to die because now everybody knows that people can work from home. No, it hasn't. Actually, we're seeing big
Yeah.
organizations that, said, okay, you can work from home, you can work fully remotely, are now changing their tune and saying, actually, you know what, everybody needs to come back to the office for at least
Yeah.
some part of the week. And and so I think it's about helping people to identify how they work best and where they work best depending on what they're doing. And that's why I think the definition of hybrid work actually doesn't exist yet, not a universally accepted definition of hybrid, because
Mm.
what hybrid means to you is probably different than what hybrid means to me. So let me ask you that. I mean, if I said define what hybrid work means to you, what would you say?
It would be like sometimes in an office that's specified by the company and sometimes elsewhere.
That's a really valid definition. And for me, the way that I work, it's being in an office all the time, but never the same office and never the same space within an office. So I
Mm.
work from home almost never. I mean, it's super, super rare occasion. And I can tell you exactly what those occasions are. It's when I have a call that's at 8 o'clock in the morning or at 10 o'clock at night, you know?
Mhm.
But I never the second that that call is done, then I get ready and then I go into an office. But
Mhm.
I live in Hong Kong. When I'm in Hong Kong, I have 12 different offices that I can choose from. One of
Mm.
them is where I have my personal desk, where I have pictures of my dog and little tchotchkes and my double screen, and I love it, and I'm glad that I have that desk. I'm so grateful. And I am there, I would say, 30% of the time.
Mm.
Because going back to your point earlier about partnerships and community,
Mhm.
I also go where the people are that I wanna talk to.
Yeah.
And so most of the time, they're not where my headquarters is, because 'cause we're in a different part of the city, and so all of our other offices are in the central business district, which is where the
Mm.
majority of the partners and clients that I talk to work already. So, I plan my day based off of who I'm meeting, where they're located, and what's gonna be easiest for them, or what I want them to see. Because half of the time I'm saying, "Hey, come and meet me at this location," because I wanna introduce them to our product. And what a better
Mm.
way to introduce them to our product than to have them come and meet me there,
Yeah.
experience it firsthand, see the amazing view, get the beautiful coffee that has a cute dragon image in the foam, right?
Mhm.
And then walk around and be really impressed, and then say, "Oh, by the way, sorry, later this afternoon we're doing a coffee latte art workshop." Or there's going to be a thought leadership event tonight talking about opportunities of collaboration between businesses in Hong Kong and the UAE, right?
Mm.
And so for me, that's what's exciting, because people are becoming a lot more conscious about what kind of environments facilitate their best work, or I guess empower them to work their best and be their most productive. Because I really
Mm.
do believe that nobody wakes up in the morning and says, "Today I think I'm going to do really shit at my job. Like that's my goal today." I think most people
Mhm.
wake up and say, "I would really like to have a really great day. I would love to, go into wherever it is that I'm working and walk out of there feeling like I really was productive and that I accomplished the things that I needed to accomplish and maybe more." And with this new openness to being more flexible, I think that that's definitely a positive outcome.
Yes. I mean, that hybrid work example you gave, I think it just like sings true praises. Honestly, where marketing is going too. Like, what makes sense for me or my definition of something might be different from what your definition is. At the top of the call, like, actually before the camera, we were talking about like AI and like what AI is to you is different than what it is to me. And it's not just in the technology that's available, but it's also about like the value of the technology and the value of actually using those, those new tools. So in this new post AI world, let's say, where the barriers to entry for marketing are coming down, and we're finding that it's easier to use different tools. It's easier than ever to create like masterpieces in terms of copywriting, in terms of imagery and creative assets. What is the real competitive advantage for marketers today or leaders of marketing industries?
I always say when we're talking about AI, and I'm actually on the founding Women's Council for the AI Association of Hong Kong. So we're having these kinds of conversations all the time.
Mm.
And I always ask a couple of questions. The first is if you had to break your day down into percentages, how much of your day is spent doing what I call the simple and mundane tasks?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. For me, I would say, depending on the day, maybe 30%,
Mm-hmm.
40%. These
Mm-hmm.
are things that that need to be done in order for the larger strategy, the larger business, everything to move forward. Like, it doesn't require a lot of brain power. It doesn't require any kind of unique perspective. It doesn't require any understanding of a larger ecosystem or market trends but it
Mm-hmm.
still needs to happen. Let me give you an example. Expense reports. I cannot
Mm.
tell you how much time, because I travel a lot, I spend writing expense reports. It
Mm.
has to happen. I mean, it's an absolute requirement, especially for me, because otherwise I have to pay for all of it myself, right?
Right, right,
So I
right.
need to do them. They are the bane of my existence. Like, I
Yep.
absolutely cannot stand doing those. And
Mm.
I ask anybody, there's budgets. If you work in an advertising agency, it's timesheets. I mean, the list is endless of these very administrative, very simplistic sorts of tasks that can be automated. So that's the first thing, right? I think AI has tons of capabilities in terms of making processes that don't require creativity much more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really exciting because what does that do? That then gives your employees time back to do really innovative stuff. I teach a course in interactions in space, and one of the things we were talking about is Google. And back in the old days, Google still is, right, considered one of the, pioneers of working in a different way. And
Yeah.
one of the groups in my class did a project on Googleplex, and they were asked to look at everything from design of offices to company policies, and a lot of other stuff that makes this, a flagship of innovation. And
Mm.
one of the things that they brought up was that Google encourages their employees to take a certain percentage of time out of their week to spend on innovation,
Mm-hmm.
ideation, brainstorming, coming up with new projects. Like, that's really unique. Most organizations don't do that. But imagine if you just took that 30% of my day that I just told you I spend doing these very mundane, not creative, but necessary tasks, and said,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to create a tool that's going to do all of that boring shit for you.
Yeah.
Take that 30% and, come up with a new product line. Think about how you're going to reach a new target audience. I do something that's going to help the business that you didn't have time to do before. Go and have meetings with different departments just for the purpose of understanding what it is that they do. Who knows what kind of opportunities that will unlock, what kind of
Mm.
synergies you're going to be able to create just because you didn't actually even really understand what they were doing or what projects
Mm-hmm.
they were working on. So I think that that's really, really exciting. And then the other thing that I always tell my team is, use AI as a brainstorming tool. There are so many great ways to just use it as, a foundation builder or as building blocks to, unlock, get you out of writer's block or, help you see something from a different perspective, or just give you a variety of different pathways that you can go down. And that's, I think, also really exciting. And, and on my team, we use AI a lot.
Mm-hmm.
We use it for other things that used to take a lot of time that we didn't have resources to pay for, like translations, for
Mm-hmm.
example. Instead of having to pay somebody to do translations for us, we didn't have the capacity to do that. Now we can use a tool to at least create the drafts that then gets checked by somebody that is a native speaker of that language. Boom. Wow.
Mm.
How much more efficient is that, right? So I think that that's really exciting. But the cautionary tale is when people get overzealous and they say, "Oh, well, now you can use these AI image generators and I'm going to create an entire brand campaign. I don't need people anymore. I'm just going to use this tool and I'll have one administrator that sits there and does it all. It's not going to work that way because it's easy if you don't have any expectations, right? If you're playing around on a weekend and you want to, create a video of your mom on a slip and slide because you think it would be funny, you can do that. That doesn't have any brand. Sorry, that's just the first thing that came to my mind. I don't know why. But my point is that my husband sends me these hilarious videos of me doing things that I would never do.
That's hilarious.
And it's super funny, but it also has no implications for anything other than me being annoyed at him for making fun of me. Right. So maybe for him it has implications, but it's really dangerous if you don't have very clear guidelines and parameters from a branding perspective, especially for a company like ours that really prides itself on quality, on sincerity, on authenticity. And so just assuming that you can upload your brand guidelines into a tool and say, okay, now, build my social media content calendar for the next month. And then somebody just takes that and uploads it and nobody actually checks it to make sure that, the messaging is correct is not the way to go about using AI, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there has to be some quality checks in that. What was it? Just a couple days ago, somewhere in London, I believe, had posted this big Christmas mural, and people were just grilling it, and it got taken down within 24 hours because the reindeer and the kids and the sleds and the Santa Claus were all warped and melting because it was just AI slop, that didn't surpass any quality guidelines before it went up. And yeah, it's very clear that this was somebody slacking.
Yeah. And I think that there's lots of opportunities to help upskill people to use AI more smartly, which is going to be a benefit for organizations because again, then it's going to unlock the potential. I mean, it's the same thing when you're a public speaker, right? I speak on lots of panels and participate in lots of different conferences. And I always say to everyone, the hardest job actually isn't being the subject matter expert. It's not being the panelist. It's actually being the moderator. The moderator is the hardest job. Why? Because the moderator is the one that doesn't need to just know their own story. If you're invited as a subject matter expert on a panelist, say, it's a marketing conference and you have a panel about, the future of SEO, and you have 4 panelists and they all work in different agencies and they're dealing with SEO and SEM as an example, right? That's what they do every single day. One would hope that they would be able to speak very intelligently about that, right? The moderator, but they just need to know their story. They need to be able to give case examples from the things that they've done and explain the rationale behind the strategies and the ideas that they're going to present, right? The moderator needs to know that, but then also needs to know the other person's background story strategy and the other person's background story and strategy and understand why they're different and then tie all of the stories together and find the synergies and ask the questions about the differences. So I think that if you can crack being a moderator, you're going to be an excellent public speaker in your own capacity. And I think that that's the same with AI because, we were speaking a little bit earlier, but if you're playing around with, image generation, right? And you ask a really simple question, like, give me a picture of a dog sitting on a street playing with a ball. There are a trillion different images that you could get out of that. And who knows which one you're going to get, right? And you brought up the point oh, yeah, maybe it's a life-size picture, or maybe it's a, supposed to be lifelike, or it's a cartoon, or how many different dog breeds are? Who knows? You're going to get a German Shepherd, you're going to get a Labrador Retriever, you're going to get a French Bulldog. What street is it on? Is it New York City? Is it Hong Kong? Is it, in the fields of Vietnam? You literally have no idea. And so if you aren't asking the tools the right kinds of questions and you're not putting the correct frameworks in there, then you're going to get a bunch of shit anyway. And that is actually a waste of time. So learning how to craft really smart prompts is a skill that I think everybody can learn. And that's when AI starts to become really powerful, because otherwise you're gonna spend a lot of time asking it to generate things for you that actually you can't even use.
Yeah. And that brings up a good point. I'm building a team that is under me, and I have scorecards for each one of them and a list of core competencies. And one of those is AI proficiency. And it's not just technical proficiency. Do I understand the use cases that different AI can, that can help me, like ChatGPT versus Claude versus, some other workflow builder like Zapier or something like that. But another score is like, what is the quality of work that is produced through these AI tools? So in that way, I'm hoping that I can help, my team really elevate their career over the next 5 to 10 years. But it's really interesting because as I'm looking through these core competencies, there's like marketing skills, there's AI literacy and like AI, production. There's sales skills. There's a couple other things in there that are like core, but one of them is soft skills, which is like attention to detail, nuance, follow up, ability to, like self awareness, like ability to learn new things. Yeah. And as I was onboarding someone new just last week. And as I was showing him through these, I was like, it may seem like the marketing and the AI and these things are the most important to you, and they are right now. But a decade down the road, soft skills is going to be the most important because pretty much technology at the rate that it's going, like, is going to take over all the marketing trends and producing the content and like creating the workflows. We're already seeing it with prompt based like workflow generation. So I'm like, but the most important skill that you can have is to connect emotionally with people and to be able to learn new things and like to adapt quickly. Anyway,
I
at,
totally agree with that. I totally agree with that.
when
Touche.
I do my TEDx talk, that's what it's going to be about. It's going to be like,
Love it.
building your personal leadership brand in a post AI world. Yeah. And
Awesome.
speaking of which, you have a TEDx talk. Where can we find out more about you online, more about the Executive Center? Where can we find more?
Sure. So I did do a TED Talk. It's on the power of not knowing. So I think that's ever relevant today. Like, let's embrace the things that we don't know. Let's not be embarrassed by not understanding something, and let's ask really good questions to help continue to learn. And your point about that's something that will continue to give back to you throughout your entire life, even as the technologies and the processes and everything changes. And you're going to be changing your jobs and you're going to be working with different people, so having that perspective, I think, is super valuable. So I'm glad that's one of your competencies. I think that's great. So you can find that on YouTube, on TEDx
Nice.
website as well. You can check out my own website, chelseaperino.com. That has lots of information about me. It's got all the articles I've written and lots of the speaking engagements that I've done and where I'll be next. So always love to meet people in person. And I'm very active on LinkedIn. I do agree. And I've seen some very funny posts about, the AI generated content. I don't do that. Okay. I use it as a brainstorming partner, of course, but I write all my stuff. So
Nice.
just to preface that, I like LinkedIn a lot. I think it's a really valuable platform, just to learn about, what people care about and understand a little bit more about the questions that our communities that we're a part of are asking, people that we don't necessarily connect with. And also globally, I think it's really interesting to see like first person commentary on, from a real estate perspective, for example, what are people in America worrying about? What are the conversations that they're having about flexible workspace, return to office, the larger corporate real estate environment? What are the similarities between Asia, where I live? What are the
Mm.
differences? So I think that that's a really interesting platform. So you can find me there, Chelsea Perino. And the Executive Center, we've got an amazing website. We've got all the social channels as well. So the Executive Center and Instagram and Facebook and all of the other channels that I mentioned, we're very active. So we would welcome.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds good. Well, you heard it here, folks. Go follow Chelsea. And Chelsea, thank you for being here. It's been a pleasure of a conversation. And I learned a lot. And, I hope to meet you in person, actually. Whether
Me
that's at
too.
one of your establishments or one of your locations or at a conference or who knows? Who knows?
Thank you so much. I mean, it was a really, really interesting conversation. And I think that, we just have to keep talking about these topics, right? Because, by the time this gets, produced and out somewhere, there'll be another platform out there or another, version of the things that we're currently using that we're going to need to learn about and talk about. So it's been fun to be a part of it today. Thanks very much.
Exactly. Thank you. See you next time.
Cheers.